the News from the Real World podcast. As you can see, we've changed our venue in the midst of this podcast.
Due to a scheduling error.
We're just cool like that. So we're going to start off by hitting this third section with an article about gun control. So, Kat, go ahead and take it away.
So this article is entitled, Changing the Narrative on Gun Control. Is Theater Up to the Task? It's by D.W. Gregory on HowlRound.com. This article talked a lot about different ways that theater has kind of influenced or affected the public opinion about a certain political or sociological or what have you issue. And so it's basically asking can theater change the narrative of a political policy that's currently kind of the hot topic of the day, like gun control? Or it talked about how theater performances after 9/11 would sometimes try to address 9/11 and the political implications of what was happening in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And so the thing that I found most interesting about it was how they related the sit-ins of the civil rights movement to kind of this theatrical force. And they were saying that the sit-ins were basically theater, that they would dress up in costumes, they would all wear their Sunday best, they would have a script that they kind of had to follow along with, which meant that they couldn't yell back, they couldn't react to what was happening to them. And that I had never thought about that in that way, and now that I think about it, it's very true that that is exactly what it was. And so what do you guys think? Is this kind of still relevant in today's conversation?
What I appreciated most about that article was that they took she talked to an expert from Arizona, or a professor from Arizona State, who writes dramatic and non-dramatic pieces, and what he said about it was the goal in doing something like this would be not necessarily to sway the opinion of people one way or the other, but just to get people audiences more actively involved in the conversation and have something invested in it. And I think that that's a far more powerful way of looking at it than trying to write a play that's going to make you feel one way or the other about gun control and really pull to your emotions when you bring in things like Sandy Hook and other things that have gone, other tragedies that have occurred.
The thing I appreciate about this article is, yes, I thoroughly agree that theater has the power to affect the political narrative in this country. And even recently, Laramie Project, I think, did a huge amount for 8. But I feel like the elephant in the room that's not being addressed is, I think the venue for addressing the gun control narrative is actually the cinema, not theater, more so.
Okay, that's really interesting to me. I would say that, what you mentioned about in the article about how, sit-ins were a form of theater, that really struck a chord with me. I thought that was like a brilliant connection that we've been missing as far as our more political theater that's geared towards changing minds and legislation. And I agree with you that the venue is not quite right. I think that the Laramie Project was incredibly powerful, and it has, I think, perhaps affected some legislation in certain ways as far as hate crimes goes. But I would say something like gun control is a very difficult situation to approach because of the lobbyists and the protections surrounding it, that people believe they have the rights to these weapons. So I think a more public venue, that was so striking because the press got images of it, video or film and photos that were indelible. They were striking. People thought of them as very powerful images, and we were like, we cannot treat people like this, and thus the public responded to it. So, as she mentions in the article, apparently crying parents is not enough to affect people in a way that will make them want to step up for legislation. So what kind of theater or cinema, perhaps? Because maybe that is the right thing. That has a much larger audience.
I feel like, let's face it, I think the vast majority of a theater-going audience is geared more towards liberal politics.
So in a way, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a great concept that I actually highly encourage any artists who are trying to do political stuff to think about the venue that they're presenting it in, because that really is a powerful aspect to it. So jumping off to
Something completely different.
pretty much completely different. Let's talk about a new tell-all book about Spider-Man.
Yeah, this is from the New York Times, piece entitled "And Now a Spider-Man Tell-All" by Patrick Healy. Apparently, Julie Taymor's major script collaborator throughout the whole very much publicized Spider-Man debacle. This guy named Glenn Berger has come out with a tell-all behind-the-scenes look at the creation of Spider-Man and what went wrong and all the infighting, and particularly between Bono and The Edge, who were wrote the music and helped with the lyrics, and Julie Taymor, and just kind of the little petty things between the producers and Ms. Taymor, and how they took away her opening night tickets, and the producers secretly went behind Julie's back to Glenn, the guy who wrote the book, to get him to write a new version of the script without telling her, and how duplicitous he had to be, and how sorry he feels that he ruined this relationship with Julie that went back almost a decade. So there you have it.
That's pretty much it. I mean, aside from, like, I love gossip. Theater gossip, especially, for some reason, is really juicy to me, so I can appreciate that, but otherwise, aside from that aspect of it, I mean, are we going to use this as a cautionary tale?
I think it's just, I think the value is that people are attracted to the train wreck.
I mean, that's why it's still on Broadway. It's a terrible show. Every single critic and everyone's seen it. It's a terrible show.
Critic proof, though.
But people still go to see it because it's the shock. It's the I want to see something that's just so terrible that it's good.
Well, the thing that I found most interesting was that the inception of this play came from such a misguided place, where you have this valuable property, this extremely recognizable character that everybody has a specific opinion on. Julie has her ideas, and she invented new characters for the play. And then Marvel Entertainment, which owns the property, said, "No, this isn't our Spider-Man. He needs to be more like this, and you need to get rid of this character that's not a part of the Spider-Man, universe." And then you have Bono and The Edge, who have their own ideas about music, and it's their first theater piece. It just seemed like too many cooks in the kitchen, essentially.
I'm eager to see the book, because I really don't know much about the show, except for obviously what critics have said. But I'm not surprised that people still go see it. People go see movies tons of times, even though they know they're going to be bad movies. They'll go buy the movie, they'll watch it on Netflix, they'll have parties to watch this horrible movie. I don't actually see.
Yeah,
going to see.
I don't know if theater has that same. I mean, first of all, the boundary to entry is much lower with the film.
That's true.
It's $15 max, whereas this show literally costs like around $100 to get at you.
Right.
At least.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. But I didn't realize it was Glenn Berger who was involved in writing the show, and I would buy this book because Glenn Berger wrote one of my favorite plays. And I learned today, I was like, oh wow, Glenn Berger did Spider-Man? I might read this book because he wrote Underneath the Lintel, which is an amazing play.
Okay, now that, in a way, this almost seemed like a way for him to hedge his bets. In the sense that, Julie Taymor's reputation after Spider-Man has changed drastically because of how Spider-Man has been received and all of this gossip surrounding it and all the drama that happened. And now, in a way, her brand is diminished because of this. Whereas, in a way, it seemed like he was trying to protect himself from being blamed for it.
Oh,
and he was trying to
absolutely.
make excuses.
Right.
This is a step towards repairing his relationship with her, I guess.
My favorite things were like the dialogue that was quoted in the room saying, "I love her, I really love her, and she despises me." And her quote is, "You don't have a soul," to a producer or something. Yeah.
Wild stuff. I'm sure that's going to be a really sought-after book in the theater industry in the next year or so.
Doing okay. She's got Midsummer opening at theater for a new audience very soon.
I think they'll all be all right.
Shouldn't be any script problems with that.
So moving on to another absolute spectacle, but one that's been incredibly successful in the last 10 years, or not quite 10 years, about 8 years or something like that. The technology behind the Las Vegas magic of Cirque du Soleil, talking specifically about Cirque du Soleil's show Love, which is sort of based on the music of the Beatles, in an article by Michael Venables on Forbes. So this was mostly talking about the technical aspects of the show, the things that really kind of make it so mind-blowing, but that most people wouldn't think about or know about. So the machinery behind it, the show uses a ton of automation. So, you know, we use a fair amount of automation here, not quite with the same, boldness that they do. They had something like, how many axes of...
142. I believe that we have 3. TDs might correct me later. I believe we have 3 axes of automation here.
So, I mean, that's really wild. That is some next level stuff there. So, I mean, has anyone seen this show first?
I haven't. You know, reading the article, it sounded interesting from a technical point of view, but I imagine it's fucking terrible. The show itself just sounds awful.
Well, I don't know. I love the Beatles.
I do too, but it should be the Beatles doing Beatles music.
They're kind of dead.
No, wait, that's one of the cool achievements about this particular show, though, is it is the first Cirque du Soleil show to be set to canned music.
Right.
And as a stage
The
manager,
Beatles are never canned.
by canned I mean pre-recorded. As a stage manager, I think that just leaves absolutely no room for flexibility and things to go wrong. You know what I mean? You can't necessarily stop the music. Whereas, like, you know, a musician, if something goes wrong, he might milk it a little bit longer. But this article and the technology, you know, they go on to talk about the specifics of the technology, and they discuss how much room there is for flexibility. And I would need to see it to believe it, because I just don't understand.
Cirque especially, though, is known for, having had friends that worked for Cirque,
Right.
they're known for having 1,000 contingency plans. They have, if this one thing goes wrong, they have a whole set, they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And so it's astonishing how much flexibility they can have, even if they do have pre-recorded music and these automation things that are, you know, it starts, it's going to keep going. And as a theater person, that's so interesting to me, because they can completely change the direction of the show if they need to. This one performer can go on, great, we're going to do this, and skip that music and do whatever they need to do.
That's really wild. That's incredibly impressive. Something I didn't know. Something that could have been in that article. Although the article was pretty, they really hit a lot of the technical aspects of the show. I didn't understand half of it, to be honest. So our final article we're going to talk about is another huge hit show, probably one of the biggest hits in the last 50 years in theater.
And it's in Pittsburgh right now.
And it's in Pittsburgh right now.
I'm a friend of the show.
I have not seen it yet, ever.
Oh, you should go see it.
So the show, in case you haven't guessed yet, we're talking about is The Lion King. Another Tamor hit.
Another Tamor hit. So in this article, costumes for Lion King continue to amaze shows and fans, by Alice Carter. It's on triplive.com. They basically talk about how the costume designer who was originally slotted for the show, who worked with Tamor, has still been working, is still currently working on the show 16 years later.
Michael Curry.
Michael Curry, yes. And he talks about how he's modeled Simba's face over 150 times, and he's still sending out fresh costumes for Timon and Zazu, who are 2 of his favorites. It's Timon and Zazu, and obviously Mufasa.
And the evolution too. He started from a more realistic place with the costumes.
I thought that was probably my favorite parts of the article. Is he talks about how that was really the folly. The original Mufasa mask they had, you know, it was so realistic. They had manipulatable eyebrows and ears and all of these kinds of things. And while the mask looked beautiful, the actor looked horrible in it, and so they had to chuck it and come up with something where you could really integrate the actor with the costume, with the piece. And Julie Taymor comes from a background in puppetry, so I imagine that helps a lot. Because I would say that they're not costumes, that they are characters, they're beings, it's an entirely different thing. You should really go see it.
I really would love to. That bit that he says about, you know, leaving it up to the actor to create the character and the performance was, I thought, really, really amazing.
Generous, too.
Very generous, exactly. Whereas he could have created a fully articulated
So,
mask.
deal with it, mofo.
Yeah, he was like, I want this to
Which
be
is
the
so
actors.
different from the article, the last article we talked about, where Cirque is so focused on the spectacle of it and making everything automated and making it, you know, as big as possible. Whereas with this, it's, you know, people have told Michael Curry, oh, I love when his eyebrows move, and they don't move, but because of the actor and because of how the actor is able to incorporate the mask, that people kind of put their own interpretation on it and make it do what they want it to do.
It's like, I've had mask classes before, and it's really the performer that makes the mask come to life. The mask is dead until the performer endows it with life. It's like the character of Elmo had gone through a bunch of different puppeteers, and it finally came alive with this one puppeteer. So, oh, that's the character.
I think that's a great lesson for all of our designer friends out there. So thank you for joining us for this week's version of the News from the Real World podcast. You can check out any of the articles via the link below, and if you care to tweet to us, we have a hashtag as well, hashtag NFTRW, and we'll see you next week. Okay, so it's going to be like crazy echoey, so...
It'll sound cool, like we're in a cave.